we're very happy to have here. So thank you so much for making time for us here, Daniel. I think most of us have been following your work for a long time, and we're really looking forward to sharing some time and discussing what we've learned and what we could take away from this now with you. Because we've more or less to build on the conversation that I hope everybody had a chance to look at. You've had with Liv Burry around meditations on Moloch. We have understood that there are downward spiral negative dynamics emerging from Moloch, emerging from what's probably, in your words, very close to the reason for all of the issues we're having to deal with, which is our idea of money over money return, of trying to optimize towards financial profits. So we've all understood that. But now we're faced specifically because we're coming to the end of this series with the question of, okay, what are we going to do with this? How are we going to carry this forward into our everyday lives, into our realities in which we have to deal with the pressures of managing money or simply explaining to others how we think about the world, right? This is difficult. This is really difficult. And so this is one avenue that we'd like to explore. How can we maintain this for ourselves? How can we deepen this? How can we not let this slip after we've embarked on this journey together here? And maybe we can also touch on some ideas of how to put this into action in the world, concrete ways of putting this into action, which is difficult, which is because you have to make some very clear and probably uncomfortable decisions, but I don't want to give your talk, Daniel. So I want to give you some space to unfold some of your ideas around this, like we exchanged earlier. And then we open a conversation and have some fun. Daniel, do you feel something coming up that you would like to pick up on and we take it from there?
You said that people here had watched some part of that talk that I gave with Liv Burry, and obviously have went through this whole Gita series and heard a lot of things. And you mentioned that many of the people here are familiar with things that I say that I don't care to repeat previously. So I guess if this is especially the last in the series, and hopefully people take something meaningful away, I want to share what is most useful. So I guess I'm curious to hear what is top of mind for people and maybe speak into that.
Okay, let's begin. Let's open with that. If you all reflect, and I think Patrick, you might have unmuted. No, Patrick's still muted. If you all reflect on what happened during this series and as some of our sense-making conversations in between the sessions with our guests, and you map that onto the rest of your life as you were going through the series, what comes up for you? Is there something you'd like to share as a foundation for this conversation today? Lucille, go ahead.
So maybe one thing that is, I think Thomas mentioned it already, but to me, as a person who sits on the crossroad between capital and technology, knowing what we know now, and also based on this series, it would be very beneficial to understand not only what is our next step as individuals, because I think we'll each take it to our own lives and implement it in different ways, but what is it that we can do individually or collectively to take a step in the direction that will better us and everyone? Maybe that's 30,000 feet, but this is really where I'm struggling to really put some concretization into it.
You feel like in the conversation so far with everyone who spoke on Gita series, you have a different view about what the intersection of capital and technology portends for the future on the current track?
I feel like we have to build two parallel worlds where the current track somehow needs to be tweaked and continued, but the new track needs to come about and work in parallel. I don't think we can switch. And it's about how we treat capital, or what we think about it in terms of being a resource or whatever, like anything else. And what we can direct people who are technology people, or people who think around the philosophy of technology, maybe, of what should be done in order to address these challenges that were raised here about the energy and the minerals and resources. And yeah, that's a bit what I feel like. It's a parallel situation, which can take a long time or a short time, but somehow needs to start happening. Or maybe it is happening already and I'm just late in the game.
So the big question that you're asking, I think, is the question of this call, which is what can we tangibly do individually and collectively towards all that needs done as people who are sitting in the place of investment in technology? What can be done that moves the current system in a better direction, at minimum, not in a worse direction? And is there stuff that can be done with capital that helps develop new systems that are more fundamentally adequate? Hopefully we'll unpack that over the course, but you said a couple things that were just little tangents I wanted to speak to first. You mentioned what can we do with capital that is a resource like any other. This may be obvious to everybody, but if not, it's really worth saying. I would not say that capital, meaning fiscal capital, the way we think of it, is a resource like any other. I think it is a optionality token for all forms of extractable and exchangeable resource without actually being a resource itself. I think it is a technology. It's a social technology that is arguably the most powerful technology humanity has ever created. And that it is fundamentally both constructive and destructive, but more importantly, destructive for this phase. And that's not based on how we use it. It's intrinsic to the nature of the technology itself, no matter how we use it. And it's just, if this is not understood, there's like nothing that can be done. So just indulge me a moment on it. First, the concept of resource. I had a teacher of anthropology that would have been like 110 now. When I was young, he was very old, and he had the fortune of getting to be the first Western person to contact many indigenous tribes, or one of the first. They were still separate from Western civilization and modern civilization writ large. And he was doing cultural analysis on seeing how much the current modern society model had become ubiquitous conditioning, and all of our studies of human nature were inside of ubiquitous conditioning, so you can't really call it nature. And so he wanted to see the things that hadn't been conditioned in that way, and if human nature actually expressed differently. So he was looking at the most violent and least violent cultures and looking at what they are, that's a function of. And one of the key things was looking at how it was a function of language. I actually had a couple teachers that had looked at this deeply. One of the most profound insights was they said that in some of the island Polynesian cultures and some of the Amazonian cultures that were extremely nonviolent, both in inter and intra-tribe, they didn't have the word mine in their language. First person possessive just wasn't even a word. And in other ones, they had the word, but it was extremely de-emphasized. It was like a strange word to refer to a bad idea. And they had ours, but even ours, possession, didn't mean the same thing. It had the concept of stewardship built into the semantic itself. And mine is actually one of the first words that most kids in our culture learn. And one of the things that they found was that the cultures that didn't have the word mine also didn't have the word or the prevalence of the words greed, selfish, or jealousy. Because those were not just innate human emotions that are always there, they were actually mimetic constructs. If you have a shared ownership situation in a tribe, but it's not ownership because you don't have massive surplus, so you don't have radical wealth inequality, everybody shares stuff, whoever goes fishing, that's for everybody, whoever is picking berries, is you just don't build those same constructs in terms of I want what they have. It just doesn't occur in the same way. So there are so many constructs that we have that we take for granted as just human nature that we have to work with that are actually at the foundation of our problems. So I mention that because the word resource is an inherently violent word, the way we think of it, the way we've defined it. Human resources is how do we see sentient human beings who are somebody's baby, who are going to be on their deathbed reflecting upon their purpose in life. And if they use their time, how do we see them as a resource for a company that has a fiduciary responsibility to profit maximize? They're not fucking human resources. They're human beings. And talking about natural resources, is a whale a natural resource? Because it is. If you're running a whaling boat, a whale's a natural resource. Is any sentient animal, is an ecosystem that we devastate a natural resource? Black people used to be natural resources, meaning part of the chattel, the same way we treat cows. So the word and concept resource has to go. Like it just fundamentally, the idea, man's dominion over everything is here for us. If we can control it and extract it, its utility value rather than intrinsic value for us. At the heart of the ideas that has to go is that. So I want to throw out the concept of resource to begin with. And I want to say that words like mine and resource and like they're colonized, colonizer mind concepts. And so just there's that. Now, let's talk about natural resources. I've got steel, I've got copper, I've got lumber. I don't really fucking have those things because to get that copper, I had to clear cut a forest and then dig a giant hole, kill all the life that was there, have that mining tailings go into the water and kill all the fresh water. Like this is why we have to not think of it as a resource. It's also important to get that like the biosphere is mostly 6 atoms. It's mostly hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, phosphorus. It's 6 atoms. It took 1 billion years of geology and then another 1 billion years of single cell organisms to take all the mercury and cadmium and like toxic shit and bind it in rocks way down here and build up a biosphere layer up here. And that was good because a tree could turn into a frog, could turn into a moss, could turn into a mushroom, could turn into anything, right? The same ingredients were recycling. And so there was no waste. There was no unrenewable resource extraction. Every dead thing was made of the same building blocks until we started mining, right? We start mining and we took what took billions of years to get the super toxic shit that was buried down here and locked up in rock. We pull it up, we separate it out through smelting and whatever. And then we put the super toxic shit in the biosphere that is mostly biotoxic to all life, whether we're talking about lead or arsenic or mercury or whatever. And to get the copper or the steel, we have to make a lot of this stuff. We have the municipal solid waste, all of the trash that goes out from our house and from the restaurants and everything is so much. The world is drowning in municipal solid waste. There's 2 billion tons per year. But there's 2 billion tons of municipal solid waste per year. There's 190 billion tons of mining waste per year. Upstream from our choices to get the metals that made this laptop and everything else, I get to take the portion of the rock I want. The portion that I don't want goes into a giant ass tailings dam that always breaks and goes into the water. And so to just get like upstream from our concept of natural resource is so much biocidal insanity. I really would just want to emphasize that. Okay. And then the tree is lumber as a natural resource. No, that's a 3,000-year-old redwood. That's a 500-year-old whatever. Like, okay, but let's go ahead and pretend that's a reasonable concept to call those natural resources for a minute. Money is still not like those because I cannot instantly exchange those, right? If I've got a bunch of lumber or I've got a bunch of metal, the transport of that is difficult. Once I have as much as I can use, I get a diminishing return on the value of that thing. It stops being worth having more than I can use and it starts being worth less per unit because now I just got too much of it. And so it has a low liquidity value. But so once I've got more lumber than I can use, now it just needs protected from termites and stuff. I want less of it. But if I can sell it on the market quickly and keep getting capital, and that capital doesn't become worth less as I get more. In fact, I add interest and it becomes worth more as I get more. Now I want to cut all the trees. I want to mine all the stuff. There's no diminishing return. There's only upside. There's only accelerating return. money has no tangible value, right? It's nobody, you can't eat it, you can't build stuff with it. It's pure optionality token, but that has maximum liquidity, maximum fungibility for speed of optionality towards every other real type of value, but not every real type of value, because nothing that somebody wants on their deathbed can you actually buy with money, only towards the types of value that can be extracted, quantified, and exchanged. But what that means is that there's a lot of types of real value we will destroy in the pursuit of this optionality value. So the fact that the money means that now I have no diminishing return basis to not cut down, kill, monetize everything, where on any other resource we did. And the speed of optionality means that if anyone else is getting more money, they'll beat me at a war, political war, or a medic war, or actual war. So I have to race to get more of it. And then that the money has its own mechanics as soon as I get interest in financial services, where it exponentiates itself. And to not debase the value of the currency, we have to extract more shit from the earth and turn it into pollution and trash. That is unique to money. It's unbelievably powerful, right? A universal optionality token that has no intrinsic value, but can give me instantaneous choice for any type of value that I want, but is inherently destructive to real value in the process. So I just want to say, it will be a while before the primary way we mediate choices about physicality is not money. We all know this. It's not going to switch overnight. We have $100 trillion exchanging every day, being printed in central banks and ran through a complex global financial system backed by nation state militaries to secure the rule of law and all those contracts. That means every one of those dollars is paying for those militaries and the issues that they cause and the supply chains behind them and everything. Of the $100 trillion that trades hands every day, not one of those dollars really does not cause some harm across the supply chain, because it's utilizing resources or it depends upon hardware and other things. So the long-term solution, if humanity is to keep existing, it will not have the thing we call money or capital. It will not have an idea that qualitative value can get turned into quantitative value, and that all different quantified metrics can be made fungible, intercommensurable into a single value metric that has intrinsic exponentiation built into it. If those concepts don't go, I bet everything that I know that humanity goes extinct. And so money as a system has to go. Now, in the next little while, that's not going to happen. So we have to use it better. But it is like using the Ring of Sauron. Like, it just is. As a structure, it is the one resource to rule all resources that intrinsically has power asymmetries and stuff built in. It is an intrinsically powerful fucked technology. With that in mind, one has to understand that it is not itself benign, and it's just, we do good things or bad things with it. You can't do good things without depending upon supply chains that do lots of bad things. And if you grow those things, you grow the other things. That's implicit to the structure. Anyone who is stewarding capital, if they don't understand this, will not be a good steward of capital. I wanted to start with that.
So what will replace it?
So let's say one of the places where I recognize this, I worked on a project in my early 20s that was trying to make a universal life cycle assessment for universal value assessment, so that a big foundation could say, I put this much donation money here and it saves this many trees, but this much donation money feeds this many kids, this one protects this many rhinos, this much sequesters this many tons of CO2. I want to optimize my input across those scopes of output so that I know how to do that. So let's make metrics where I can decide how many rhino lives are worth how many children lives are worth how many tons of CO2 or pounds per parts per million of mercury. It's fucking insane, right? It just is actually fucking insane. We understand why we want to do that, because we only have one input metric. So we want one output metric, right? The one input metric is money. So we would like to say money in one, but okay, so quantify the value of those children's lives. No, don't do that. Hold it as Boolean. If we fail at saving them, we failed, and it was irreplaceable. It was priceless, irreplaceable. It was an unacceptable failure, and we just failed, period. And you try to quantify it. And right now we quantify it, you all know, through insurance and reinsurance and the way it's valued at Depository Trust Corporation and shit like that. We quantify it based on the amount of taxes that person will pay and the amount that they'll contribute to GDP and shit like that. And it's like, it is that concept of resource built into the whole thing. So right now, this is the thing everybody's excited about with AI. Oh, the AI will be able to make a global resource optimization system that can, okay, so the value of the rhino's life is worth this much. But what if the rhinos become slightly more endangered versus there becomes slightly more of them relative to the other things around it versus we have to be continuously changing the weighting functions? It's just a nonsense actual way to do it. The way to think about it is I can't interexchange rhinos for mercury for children. They're different things. They're not interchangeable. They're not fungible. So I have to think about each of them with their own accounting. How do we tend to rhinos is a thing we must succeed at. How do we tend to children? How do we tend to mercury? So if I think about the materials economy, I can't make copper out of mercury, right? We just don't have that alchemy. Like I have a certain amount of mercury. If I don't make new mercury out of old mercury, then the old mercury will be toxic, right? And so, and if I have to keep getting the new mercury from mining, that's going to be toxic. So how do I make sure that I have closed loop accounting on mercury, closed loop accounting on nitrogen, closed loop accounting on copper, because each of those are in reality not fungible for each other. So they need their own accounting system where you don't have a token that gets traded in a way that isn't based on the non-fungible physics of them. So the future economic system will be much more real, but also more complex. We don't try to reduce everything to a single thing because reduce it all to currency is reduce it all to paper clips. It is, what is a single silly ass metric that does not correspond to real value? And, the whole reason that money makes sense is because it does correspond to real value, because what the market will bear, and we're rational actors and we want real shit and the best product or service at the best value. But that's obviously nonsense, right? Nobody who's serious can take that seriously because all of the externalities are priced out. And so the commons gets destroyed running that thing. And behavioral econ has made it very clear that we don't have rational actors that make rational choices and on. So the invisible hand of the market is a bad god, right? It is a god that takes complex value and makes simple value optimized out of it. And when you take a very complex thing and run an entropy pump on it and make it very simple, you're in the process of growing one thing while debasing what it depends upon towards a death. We see an exponential curve on money, on tech, on lots of things, on caloric consumption. Exponential curves don't continue in nature, so they do one of three things. You either get a logistic curve, you get a curve up and then a curve down, or you get a curve up and then you hit a cliff. The idea that the UN and everybody wants to tell us about how we'll have a 9.5 billion person sustainable population that does this thing is just not based on real math. And hopefully Nate and other people got that across. Like, it's just not based on real math, nor does the economic system even allow for it, because it says to keep up with interest, money has to keep doing this forever. But to not debase the value of the currency, have to be more goods and services. Oh, we can make them all digital. No, you can't. Because the digital goods and services still relate to physical ones or human time and attention, right? The software bits value either is moving atoms around in the real world more efficiently, or it's for human attention, but human attention is finite. So if I start to get a lot more software than human attention can engage, I get diminishing return. So there is no money go up forever. There's no thing where that's possible, right? That's a silly thing. So the current path we're on is this. And so money this is why I said it is a powerful, like the One Ring of Power, fundamentally destructive, because it will convert the complex power of nature that is not on anyone's balance sheet into game theoretic optionality tokens on someone's balance sheet. That's what it does. And it will drive innovation for how to do that thing more powerfully. So given that right now, if we want people working on projects and we want creativity and we want resources, it's going to equal money. I want people who are stewarding money to do better rather than worse things with it. Totally want that. I want to talk to you all about how to do that. But we can't lose sight of the fact that we are using a fundamentally not just broken instrument, but something that is at the heart of what is breaking the world, or we won't take deeply enough the externalities built into the thing that looks like maybe a good thing superficially.
Lihi raised her hand early here and said, "Hey, do you have something to build on
Yeah,
the
thanks,
point?"
Thomas. I'd love to build on that. And I think just from that last point, Daniel, if any of us kind of work, I also work with UBS, with private wealth, with people who recognize this point, and yet they have access to this capital. And so it's always a dilemma to engage or not to engage with people who have access to a lot of this controlling technology that they don't believe it anymore. And so do you see, and we're all talking about impact investing and climate finance and different kind of approaches, and yet the incentive that we're talking about, the whole structure is as we see it. So do you have any ideas to follow up on that? So what kind of money activity can actually help change the system to where we want it to go, in addition to just less bad things and trying to address more intrinsic value and the change we want to see?
Yeah. So one thing I would offer for everybody is to just really do your own kind of deep first principles thinking on a particular impact investment hypothesis and see if it really makes sense. Just the fact that lots of people are talking about how exciting it is at WEF does not mean it makes sense. Climate financing is so goofy in the fundamental idea, because if I create CO2 out of hydrocarbons, I get net energy. I can't take CO2 and turn it into hydrocarbons and get net energy. I have to use energy to do that. It's along a line of fundamental thermodynamics. So I can force people to internalize that cost with law, but that's actually then not finance, it's law. And that would be a good thing to do. I can make a carbon credit as a kind of token that is people can do if they want to without it being law, which basically means it's like a fashion statement of some kind, but it won't fundamentally in the multipolar traps. But there isn't like a way to say, oh, there is a real market in the under market dynamics for a thing that is net, when you break it down to the physics, takes energy to do and doesn't give energy. Because there's a fundamental deep correlation between the capital and free energy flow. So it's just, there's so much profound non-thinking gibberish in the system that is just another thing that props up the rest of the gibberish of the system. And I'm not saying that we, like with regard to climate, Dalton Chen's carbon coin ideas or whatever, could we actually get the price of carbon forced to be internalized to cost through a multinational agreement? I'm into things like that, but that really is law more than finance. And so much of the impact investment thesis also is I'm going to define impact in a narrow way. This metric gets better, but in the process of that metric getting better, does the thing that I created interact with a lot of other things, and does it make other things worse? So if I had to give people one thought, it would be try to do a good job with any proposed investment of what its externalities are. If you're trying to do impact investment, it's going to do some good thing. What are the externalities of that thing really succeeding? And when you factor the externalities, is it still a good thing? The externalities will be physical. It's going to take a lot of new hardware, materials, et cetera. It's going to create some pollution, waste, use some resources to make that thing. It's going to drive some arms races. If it's successful, does it threaten a current industry or a current political party? What do they do in response? Their response, if driven by the thing we did, is part of the effect of the thing that we did, the factor. There's going to be possible psychosocial externalities. Obviously, you make a thing like Facebook, you change the minds of the entire planet, right? So understand physical and psychosocial externalities, plus how other entities are forced to respond to a thing you do. Some of them align the same direction, some align very opposite directions. And that's how you do externality calculus, really try to do a deep job of that. We've put together a framework for what we call yellow teaming, right? Classically, blue teaming is how do I make the thing succeed? Red teaming is how might it fail? We use the red teaming to solve the problem. So it might fail for these reasons. Let's recursively design so how it doesn't fail. But then the yellow teaming is how might it succeed and actually suck for something else? So how do we use red teaming? We have a problem we want to solve. Let's make sure it doesn't fail. And yellow teaming, let's make sure it doesn't cause some other problem, to recursively do better design on the blue teaming of how we solve that problem without causing other problems and without failing. So if people want to prototype a framework like that of consideration that becomes part of due diligence and impact thesis, that would be my top level thing to offer. Another top level thing I would offer is think about the underlying generative dynamics that give rise to the manifold problems in the world and things that you can do that address that. So we know that for all planetary boundaries, all ecological overshoot issues, a linear materials economy, rather than the closed loop materials economy, attached to a exponential growth financial system is the driver of that whole thing, right? Linear materials economy, meaning it takes resources from nature, and after production distribution, it turns them into a combination of pollution and trash. So how do you make a system where all the pollution and trash are captured and become the new input, and the input does not require new virgin resources that happen faster than nature can replenish? So closed loop writ large in the packaging industry, in the mining industry, in the appliance industry, in the everything, closed loop is fundamental. We get closed loop or we die. If you can invest in closed loop technologies, that's a category to invest in. But then really pay attention to the difference between the sales pitch, this is closed loop, and the reality of it. Like really look, are you capturing one part of your waste stream? So for instance, plasma gasification for waste management is not really closed loop. It's in the right direction in some ways, but I'm taking very complex forms of waste and just getting gas out of it that I burn, which means at least it's not just trash. I got something out of it. But all this stuff that was the trash, I did not create a new co-product that means I don't have to take this from nature again. So it's still highly entropic and doesn't close the loop. So really think through, is this actually a closed loop technology or loop closing? Anything that is now, don't think about them individually, because no piece of tech exists individually, right? What can I really do with a hammer by itself? Not much. I need the saws that made the lumber in the first place. I need the smelting equipment that makes the nails in the first place. I need lots of things. The hammer's pretty fucking useless. It's part of a tech ecosystem, right? And what is this computer without the satellite system that we're talking to each other? Like it doesn't do the same stuff. And without the entire complex supply chain of computer systems that does the lithography and makes up this thing. So one of the major problems is that we focus on parts. We do a good job of those parts. Nobody focuses on the whole. So we fuck the whole in the process, right? So we actually have to focus on new wholes. So your investment thesis should be more complex and say there's some whole, like the whole of the supply chain of packaging, right? How we make the packaging, what materials are used, how much hydrocarbon we use, how much energy, how much water, how much PFAS we put on it, et cetera, to that it winds up in the oceans, that it, all those things. I want to actually get the closed loop on that whole thing because I can denecessitate the PFAS and create a new market sector for a new kind of fluorinated surfactant that's just as bad or worse. But say, no, let's actually define how to get a self-sustaining system that is right. It doesn't have to be the everything system, but at least something, right? And I want to do now a series of investments where none of them on their own fully did that, but together I actually get loop closure. So this is another principle of impact investing I'm offering is invest in ecosystems of technologies, that collectively do something that meets a minimum threshold that on their own, none of them maybe did. And some of those will be not just physical technologies, but social technologies, some of which will not be for profit, right? And this is where you have a blended finance portfolio where your nonprofit stuff and your for-profit stuff and your lobbying stuff, because those are three types of money, right? Government money, market money, and nonprofit money. You'll do much better if you think of those three together. And so can I use some nonprofit money to tend to some part of the commons that none of the market things will because nobody will pay for it, and or to de-risk a thing that changes the investable portfolio or whatever? Can I use some percentage of the money to do legal stuff because laws have to change? Because if I don't make a certain thing illegal, the incentive will stay fucked even with the new technology. And some for-profit stuff where that entire bundle can be thought about in a regenerative way, right? This is a much better way to think about it. So for instance, let's say I want to transition mining, some category of mining. And let's say in a particular category of mining, the net profit is relatively low because we've had a lot of diminishing return, but the total volume is high, right? We're talking like trillions in volume, but maybe at a 2% margin. And the alternate way to get that metal, which is right now, we're not recycling it out of the waste stream. We're not mining the landfill for it because it's still slightly more profitable to extract it. But there's also perverse subsidy still fucking going on, right? We're still doing the perverse subsidy on the dumb thing. Okay, so I got trillions that are flowing from pension funds and shit into the toxic thing and not into this other thing.
Babe, your parents are outside.
What's that? Oh, maybe somebody should mute. So I want to change the market parity where the toxic thing is just under profitability. So all the money wants to divest even for the wrong reasons. And the other thing becomes just above profitability. So I move trillions, but maybe I can use a few million of the right nonprofit lobbying money to change that topology. So for instance, can I do lobbying that moves the subsidy from the bad thing to the new good tech? And can I do a bunch of public awareness that makes it to where the politicians have to do that because their people want? So they'll do the public awareness with the nonprofit. I do the research with the nonprofit. I do some lobbying to change the subsidies. I also do some activist stuff that makes it to where more of the purchasers say we're not going to purchase stuff that comes from conflict metals or from polluting metals or mountaintop removal or whatever it is. As a result, I drive the cost of this thing up. Because it didn't have a huge margin, I drive it up above the margin. Now money wants to divest from it naturally. If I simultaneously took something below market parity, the money will naturally follow the change gradient, right? It changed the topological gradient. Now I might be able to spend a few million nonprofit, maybe a few tens of millions of lobbying money to move $1 trillion of market capital that I don't actually even have to talk to the people and they don't have to have the right values. Sociopaths will make that change because it's in self-interest. This is an example of how to think about a whole ecosystem of types of finance, types of capital, a whole ecosystem of projects, an ecosystem of types of leverage together. So in the same way that we think of parts, we optimize the parts, we break the whole. One of the things to do on the other side is think about how to benefit the whole, how to use capital across a number of types of capital, a number of types of interventions to build more robust, complex, anti-fragile ecosystems. This, of course, requires more understanding, but this is something I would really like to offer. So even in just the impact investment, invest in a few technologies that have synergies. I'll give you examples. I'll give you another example. Take any time that something happened that caused an environmental externality that actually ended up hurting another market, but whatever market did that didn't care because they weren't invested in the other thing. We didn't bother paying the extra money to do good sewage management because financially we didn't have the money, we didn't care. And so on our balance sheet as a state or whatever, dumping the sewage in the developing world into the river was cheaper than building the $10 million waste facility or whatever. But now that happened to kill a whole bunch of fisheries downstream that don't even happen to be in our country, right? Because the river crossed a country line. But those fisheries were making 10 million a year and we just lost all those industries. And now I get to say, if I make a sewer here, do I get the fisheries back here? And can I amateurize the future value on those fisheries and own the futures on them to be able to invest in making this thing here because it's going to open up a new industry and I'll actually be able to do that thing profitably. I don't have to do this as a pure nonprofit project because I look at ecosystems of interconnectivity. So you can use financial capital to rebuild ecosystems if you can think with more complexity than the current system does. So if I jump to the practical stuff because I know people, and the practical is hard because if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, and the Moloch machine is oriented in the wrong direction. But there is practical stuff. Do really deep yellow teaming for any technology that you might invest in. Look at what it's going to fuck up and either don't invest in it or figure out how to change the technology to not fuck that stuff up. That's number one. Two, look at domains of investment that are fundamental to everything that needs to happen. Closing the materials economy is a domain that has to happen. And that includes not just the inorganic fraction, but the organic fraction, right? Closing the loop on agriculture, waste management, and soil regeneration is also a loop we have to close. Moving to sustainable sources of energy while factoring that the sustainable energy has material supply chains that have to be factored, that has to happen, right? And especially when you think about these things together. So think about domains that have to happen for the world very deeply and look at those domains. Look at multiple technologies together that have synergy values that they don't have on their own. And not just only for-profit technologies, but for-profit things, law things, public opinion things that collectively would do the right thing, where the portfolio as a whole actually can make profit, even though not all the money in it is for-profit. And already major corporations fund nonprofits and lobbying to do fucking shit on their behalf. That's a thing. It's just only military contractors and big pharma and big oil do financial warfare like this, and they do it for fucked purposes. So they will end up doing lobbying on their behalf to buy the sovereignty of a small country and whatever. I want that level of financial engineering, global level financial engineering, to be done on behalf of the commons by people who actually understand how to do that. I want Soros level financial engineering for not the privatization of wealth, but the continuity of the wealth that is needed to keep having access to do that, but for the benefit of the commons. There are more things, but those are a few directional, tangible things about how to think about capital allocation that still has some profit binding to it, that is directionally right.
I think that's a good moment for Patrick to come back in. You had your hand raised for a while, and you're one of the few people who I know actually do this kind of work. So, Patrick.
I put my hand down again because I wasn't sure if the question is really valid, because I obviously agree with anything I heard, and it's broken down brilliantly. I was struggling when Daniel was talking about comparing of the rhino lives and the children's lives, and I was struggling because in reality, that's what we do every day. There's no way around, because okay, now I have a for-profit company for impact investing, and I have a non-profit charitable foundation. So basically every euro I spend in one of those two, I cannot spend for something else, because we only have that one input metric, as you said, at the money. And the only reason I can do impact investing and Mr. Müller from the neighborhood cannot is because he does not have the money that I have. So I'm having this problem also with the foundation of trying to explain holistic and systemic changes to people nobody wants to hear. But even if they would want to hear, what does it mean? At one point, I have to focus on something, and I have to fund one project, one organization, one network, whatever. And I make a decision that, I don't know, the alternative education program in Mali is the thing I want to do, and the circular economy lab in Accra is the thing I want to do, which means I cannot do, I don't know, the human rights thing in Brazil. So in the end, I always take that decision if I want or not, and that always leads me to the point that I have to try to measure that impact and to bring it down and to measure what do I get for that euro that I spent. So maybe I'm here, but I still don't get what else could I do. I know it's not the right thing to do, but I still didn't really get what else I.
Good. I want to talk about very near the core of the driver of the meta crisis is our relationship to measurement and standardization, and even the philosophy of science. And I am going to address some golden calves in the process. You're asking a practical question I want to come back to, but I want to mention what's wrong with some of the pragmatics frameworks. Because I wrote a paper early on that talked about as long as the value of a tree is worth more dead than alive on people's balance sheet, or a whale is, we will continue deforestation and whaling. And it's clear that the whale in the ocean is not on anybody's balance sheet. And so leaving it doesn't economically benefit me in any way. If I leave it, it doesn't ensure someone else doesn't kill it. And if I do kill it, it's depending upon, it's $500,000 worth of sellable whale meat. That perverse incentive structure, because nature has no balance sheet and sovereign beings are seen as resources and whatever, is genocidal. It can't be called anything else. Like, we have to just be clear what the fuck it is. But if we wanted to say, what is the real value of a tree or a whale? I don't know if you can still hear me, Patrick. I lost your video, but hopefully you can.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm turning off my video sometimes because our connection is so bad. Sorry.
Understood. So if you think about the real value of a tree, the first big question becomes value to whom, to which beneficiary? Because as soon as we realize that it's not only the value to whoever it gets to put the lumber on their economic balance sheet, but everybody that it is sequestering CO2 and producing oxygen for, but also all the animals that get to live in it and all the migratory animals that are maintaining vast inter-ecosystem interactions that use that as a critical part of the inter-ecosystem interaction. The value of it, you have to say to whom first. And you find that there are so many beneficiaries and so many value types that are all non-fungible. And when you realize that the tree, if I cut down all the trees in an area, so now I get way worse floods, right? Because they're not stabilizing the topsoil. That also washes all the topsoil away. I also get way worse droughts. I also get increased extreme weather events in the area independent of climate change. So now this means all the people in the area end up moving from extreme weather events. Now I get resource conflicts. Now I get wars. Now I have to invest more in military industrial complex. Do trees prevent wars? Totally. Do trees prevent mass poverty and famine? Totally. Do trees house the bats that keep the mosquitoes down, that prevent the malaria overgrowth? And do they also stabilize the topsoil that keeps the water clean for the fish that keep the mosquitoes down? Totally. Do the trees stabilize the topsoil in a way that not only keeps the river healthy, but where the river dumps into the ocean, where you fuck all the trees in an area and the coastal ecosystem dies as a result downriver? What would it cost? Oh, no, it's fine. We cut down the trees, but we created a mechanical carbon sequestration and we're sequestering as many tons of CO2. Shut the fuck up. The tree doesn't just sequester CO2. It does a million things, right? So if I said, what would it cost for me to maintain the soil microbiota and the migratory pathways and the coral with known technologies, the tree would cost $1 trillion. And I will destroy $1 trillion of value to get $100 of lumber. Because the $1 trillion of value is not on my balance sheet and the $100 of lumber is. When you realize it's not like we externalize a few costs. It's like the only thing we internalize is the cost to us. That's it. And everything else is fucking, I have to be honest, it's all just stealing and raping. Right? The default is we externalize all the costs. We just take the shit and don't account for what it costs nature to make it, or the waste we put back, or anything, or the wars that get created over it. We just take the shit. The only thing that we factor in is what it costs us to extract it. That's it. So we only internalize the marginal game theoretic utility to us. So externality is a bad concept. We should talk about that we internalize just game theory units and otherwise are just doing raping and pillaging. That would be honest. At technological scale, extincts everything. You cannot measure all the things a tree does. You cannot, because we don't even understand what the soil microbiota really does. We're just starting to get a sense of it. We're discovering whole new phylums. We thought the Human Genome Project was going to solve all of the health issues in the world because we didn't know what when we were doing it, that genetic modulation through an epigenome was a thing. We didn't know about the transcriptome or the proteome. So our stupid ass hubris has us think we know more than we do. We affect shit that is in the unknowns that we can't measure. So when we do measure and say, I am paying attention to the thing that I can measure, I'm affecting a huge amount of shit that I can't measure, either because it's fundamentally not quantifiable, it's only qualified, or because it's in the unknown set and I don't know about it. So if I over optimize for what I can measure versus what I can't, then I'm going to destroy most of the world for what's in my little measurable belt. That is irresponsible. That idea, that mindset has to go. Yes, measure some shit, but realize that you're measuring trillionth of a percent of what you're affecting. And if you apply management theory where you can only manage what you can measure, so we're going to manage against the measurement, you will be dangerous to the world. Wisdom is the delta between what measurement-based management theory tells you to do and what the right thing to do is. That's how I would define wisdom. And that's the thing, if you want to optimize for anything on the return on, it's that, because it's the only thing that can safely steward the amount of technological power we have. So I don't want data-driven anything. I want data informed, but there's so much sensible stuff that we can sense at some level that we cannot quantify that has to be factored. When the Old Testament says in the top 10 things not to do up there with murder and rape is not have false idols, the measurement of reality and the modeling of reality is what it's talking about. The false idol is our model of reality where we optimize for that rather than reality, where rather than be in direct sensory connection to reality, we look at reality through our model. Oh, my model is I'm decreasing CO2. Look, there's no forest here. There's a stupid type of genetically engineered grass that sequesters a bunch of CO2 and killed everything that was here. You shut the fuck up about the model that's being optimized. If you looked, if you felt it, you would know that thing was wrong, right? And this is when Krishnamurti talks about we have to have immediate, non-mediated relationship to reality, not mediated through measures or symbols or models, like actually sense it. If you actually sense, you'll notice that most of the people in the name of progress are all existentially angstful and depressed. And most indigenous people, if they haven't been totally genocided, are not. And that if someone in their wealthy life gets to have 2 weeks of vacation a year, they want to go camping. They want to basically be a shitty indigenous person. Like they want to be in trees without all of the phones and shit around and with close amount of family, but they destroyed that in the name of a progress that is insane. So if this is maybe the thing I want to share here the most is, no, I studied math, I studied sciences, I like math and sciences, but in math, Gödel's theorem and then Tarski's theorem and all the unknowability theorems, halting problems, etc., show us that if I have a set of logical truths that are consistent, they will never be complete. The whole set of measures I could ever have, the whole set of laws I could ever have will be infinitely far away from the set that matters. So I want to take it as useful, but also infinitely wrong. So the thing that is sacred is unknowable, but I have to continue to sense into it and not live inside the model. Idol worship is that thing, right? That's what it is. It's why when Lao Tzu could write anything, the first thing he wrote is everything else in this book is not it, right? The first line, the Tao that is knowable is not the eternal Tao. Why is that the first thing to write? Because everything else is, don't fucking pay too much attention to the words because you can't say the thing in words. Try to get a sense from the words to a feeling that you have had right after someone you love died about what actually matters before you die. Try to get a sense of what is meaningful at all, of how you felt when your baby was born and you saw it that you forget on a day-to-day basis. But in those moments, like try to feel that and live where every one of your choices is optimizing for what you felt was important there, but for everybody. There is no way to make a good enough model. We can't replace capitalism with better capitalism or better socialism or whatever. You can't make an AI that runs it. We have to have people that make choices independent of the measures and models, meaning that factor them, but also factor the limits and make the right choice anyways. This is not systematizable. Systems are models. They are fundamental to everything wrong, is human designed systems that have the known inside and optimized for and all of the unknown outside and externalized. So who has the fucking like honesty and courage about the fact that they're going to die? They're not going to make it through this life alive. And on their deathbed, most of the hours of their life will not be what they wish they had done more of. And very few of the things they did will be what was really meaningful, and that they will tell young people, I wish you would do this. And says, fuck, I'm going to be loyal to that more than anything else. I'm going to be loyal to that more than, I won't sign a fiduciary responsibility that makes me unloyal to that, because I'm not going to have two masters I'm split between. Now, if I'm going to steward capital, I have to steward it in a way where on my deathbed, I say, all of that was the best use of my life energy and the service of the life that continues after me I could have done. And there is no way to systematize it. It just takes earnest wrestling with it moment by moment.
Patrick, does that bring up something for you?
The honest wrestling moment by moment is what I feel, what I do anyway. I'm not the biggest measurer guy in the world so far, but I was just, I have to think about it. But because I still feel every minute I think about something and I wrestle with it with energy or with trying to bear an open mind, it will always bring my human mind down to a decision that moves one across the other. And then you can name that what comes out in the end. You can name that measurement, or you can name that I found it in another way. Yeah, I'm not quite
This is
sure
really
where
important.
to draw the line.
Yeah. So Hippocrates' oath for the doctor: first, do no harm. Then, if you can help, do, but don't in the name of helping possibly do harm, which is also ahimsa in the Vedic system. Most ethical systems have a first, don't fuck stuff up, and then figure out how to help. Since almost everything, OpenAI was made to prevent AI risk because DeepMind had so much supremacy. Now it's driving it faster than anybody. So the guys at OpenAI that were scared of it made Anthropic to really focus on AI risk. Then they took 300 million from Google, and now they're racing ahead, and they were a major part of what made OpenAI release faster. In the name of we'll make something better and then get captured by Moloch, most of the problems of the world are actually the results of us trying to solve other problems. So if the best thing you do is don't make shit worse, awesome. Like, everybody's in the name of making shit better, they're making shit worse and then lying to themselves because their motivated reasoning requires them to. If you don't know how to actually make stuff better, do less stuff. This is what the whole Tao Te Ching basically says: is chill the fuck out, let the mud settle till the water's clear. And when something is really clear, and there is something like, and there's a feeling of clarity but humility at the same time, not hubris, then move forward with it while maintaining heightened observation to change it if you need to change it. So you don't make a once and final decision. You can continue to change it, because you won't be able to predict everything in advance. So if I could just say, if you just do less stuff as opposed to stuff that ends up being net negative in the name of progress, that would be way better. And if you got other people to do that, it would be better. Then work on, yes, you are not the UN, right? You are not trying to say, how do we handle resource flows for the planet? You're saying, how do I handle a little bit? I have a little bit of time. And so I'm going to finally decide to work on this thing or this thing. But you are not saying in that this other thing is less important. You're saying, of the things I'm aware of, here's where I feel I can be of best service. That's fine, because you do have not just the input of capital, you have the input of your knowledge, your contacts, all those things. And so you're factoring those multiple inputs into where you feel you can do the best thing. But if you just really check for the motivated reasoning of all the various types, the one that will make the most profit, the one that will keep everybody else happy, is the one that I can prove. I'll give you a great example. The Gates Foundation, how for each dollar I can put into mosquito nets, I know that I'm going to save this many kids. So any philanthropist who's going to put a dollar in somewhere else has to say, is it worth this many kids dying that I don't put the mosquito nets in? Fuck, I hate that line of thinking. In one way, it seems very reasonable, because that seems like I could put that money there immediately. But on the other hand, why are there so many mosquitoes in the area? Why are there so many malaria-filled mosquitoes? Because there's no fish and bats that eat them, because all the trees were cut down that the bats lived in, and the fish were overfished in the area. And so the problem will just keep getting worse. Why are the people in that shitty area to begin with and not in the better areas? Because there are landmines covering Angola and covering Mozambique from the wars that were there that were left. And then civilian gets blown up every 19 minutes from one of the 100 million landmines left. And we got to remove those fucking things and move the people back to the non-shit areas. They had to move to the shit areas because of the landmines we left. Remove landmines, get trees back, get fish back, get people out of shitty areas, get sustainable agriculture. We'll fix malaria. Now, the DEET nets, someone can't live their life inside of a DEET net. And since they're already malnourished people, they're more susceptible to the fact that DEET is a neurotoxin. Yes, if I'm only measuring that one measure in the narrowest way, that seems to make sense, but it's literally the stupidest strategy I can think of if I zoom out from that one metric. Now, if I say how many bats we saved, it's bats, but it's also other predatory insects like mosquito eaters. And it's also, but the trees that get that don't just give me those bats, they also give me soil stabilization. And how do I say this other strategy was better? Because in the short term, it didn't maximize this one metric as much. And the things that it benefits aren't even measurable. They're not all measurable. Tell a story about it that's honest. Be honest about your sensing, and then try to communicate your sensing, and have people who are willing to make real choices that include but are not limited to metrics and are really willing to look at the underlying theory and sensing. Do that.
Something like a mixture between a comment and a question to build on that, maybe, which we've, as a species, developed the sensing for Dunbar 150 scale living, scale life. But that's the level of complexity, the radius of our complexity that we can usually manage as a normal human. And given the global predicament, given the potential also benefits of global coordination towards positive outcomes, what could be a good strategy to manage those higher radiuses of complexity that are necessary for the things you are describing than what we're actually capable of? We're just going to lay out two ends of the spectrum. A few massive galaxy brains, when we're trying to outsource that to large language models at the moment, that can hold that complexity, or can we somehow fractally move it up from a Dunbar 150 to a global coordination system, or anything in between? What are your thoughts?
It's a very technical question that goes well beyond the limits of what we can do in the next few minutes, because obviously at a 150 person scale, where most things are not based on import and export but are local, you have a totally different set of dynamics where you don't have invisible externalities, right? If your waste is where you are, you see it. Your resource extraction is where you are, you see it. If you're starting to cause unrenewability issues, it's where you are. That's really different, right? So you have direct sensing, and the direct sensing is within an environment we co-evolved with. So we actually have hardware for feeling a certain way about those things, right? We have mirror neurons with each other, and we have mirror neuron-like things about the integrity of an environment. Most anyone who looks at the tar sands compared to the forest that was there before without any ideology feels a thing, just associated with that for evolutionary reasons. But we all buy shit that depends on the tar sands, but we don't look at the tar sands, right? The thing we look at is the thing on Amazon we want. And then we don't look at the plastic in the ocean that comes from that, or the landfill, or the whatever. And so the ability to ship all the ugly shit away and stay in this area is a major part of the problem. So when you have 6 continent supply chains, how do you possibly take responsibility for the nth order effects? And when you have people that seem so different than you, and it doesn't seem like your life depends on them, it actually seems like they are against you. How do you care about them? And so obviously we're not going to go back to a world where everybody lives in 150-person tribes without a global supply chain, and we either go that low tech or we figure out how to do lithography at every 150 people. We're just not going to do that, right? So we do have to figure out, is there 150-ish person, like various levels of coordination that give the high touchness possible, where then that whole unit as a cell interacts with another one, right? And that's what the Iroquois Confederacy or certain things were. And then you get the governance of a bioregion that is a natural boundary. It's not an arbitrary one defined in war and politics, but basically things within a watershed, things within a migratory system, whatever it is. And then those interact with each other. And so you go all the way up to a planetary system, but cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, organism, environment, you have these kind of layers of self-interaction. And obviously the level at which an effect is occurring is the level at which governance has to be occurring. So you want subsidiarity that pushes things out to the edge as much as possible, but that also can do governance at the level across them, because that happens. So then you say, what is the total complexity of the system that we are managing at any of those levels? Like how many bits of information under maximum compression are required to understand that thing, if you wanted to say it, if you want to use complexity as a formal term. And then does our information processing system have the complexity, both in amount and type, to process that thing? If it doesn't, then our decision system will be an entropy pump, right? It will fundamentally be reducing the total information to less than the real amount under compression, make a decision based on that, which means externalities will be proportional to that. So how do we do the collective decision-making? What parts can the machines do? Like, where can we use AI and computational intelligence to crunch really big numbers and calculus that doesn't disintermediate human choice at the center? How do we train humans to have better epistemology, both in terms of cognitive sense making? Specialists can't do externality thinking as well. There's some level of generality that is required to be able to think through externality. So there's something in the nature of what is curriculum trained, right, in people. So how do we train the epistemology of people? Then how do we get collective intelligence? One person, one vote is dumb. Market dynamics are dumb. We need things that are smarter than those things. So what is the future of liquid democracy, qualified democracy, subsidiarity, blah, 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 all those types of things? It ends up being a collective intelligence system augmented by computational capacities, but not disintermediating it, that is adequate. That is what is the future of social systems, right? What is the future of governance economics writ large? That has to be answered. To replace this, we don't just have one fungible input. We have lots of types of input at a resource accounting level, and then lots of types of choice making at various levels that occur. So that is critical to answer the long-term question. In short term, now we're in this system, we're engaging with whatever business we want to do, even if it's a local business, still is supplied by 6-continent supply chains that are supported by military industrial complex and intelligence communities and all that shit driving the arms races it does. Otherwise the social contract of the central bank produced dollar wouldn't be there, that is backed by OPEC and wars on oil and climate change. All of that is a part of every dollar we generate. Can't not be. The dollar as a contract doesn't mean shit without a military industrial complex, a global financial system, OPEC backing, and all those things. Okay, so I can't factor all that. I can't, right? Galaxy brain or not. But what I can do is try really hard to do a much better job than I have. I'm not going to just be excited about the upside and then do a plausible deniability box checking on risk assessment. I'm going to really try hard, and I'm going to talk to smart people in different disciplines and say, do you think this is a good idea? How could it be a bad idea? Regenerative agriculture person. How do you think this might be a bad idea? Watershed person. How do you think this might be problematic? Person who's aware of the cultural dynamics in this area and how it will affect wealth inequality and social dynamics and stuff. Oh, I would have never thought of those things. So part of it is try. Part of it is engage people that know shit you don't, right? Earnestly. Then engage them in, okay, I just have to kill the project because it's obviously bad for a bunch of reasons I didn't know and wasn't in the pitch deck of the investors when they were trying to pitch it to me, but I would really like this thing to happen. Can you help me innovate at all? And if so, you get some of the upside or whatever it is. Can you help me innovate into how to make this problem that you're seeing in this domain better in this thing, right? So we yellow team, and then we bring that back into a blue teaming process. And then, no, we can't figure it out. Then go with the first, do no harm, don't invest in it. we can make it better. Okay, now let's realize that there might be problems with it we didn't anticipate. So let's not go straight to full-scale deployment, right? Let's not go to 100 million people in 3 weeks. Let's do a smaller scale deployment and say, okay, it's good enough. We figured out how to do it enough that it's worth going forward, but it's worth going forward and watching for things we couldn't have anticipated and then doing that again. Now, this is going to go slower. Will it win market races? First to market advantage? Nope. Will it cost more? Yep. Do you need the types of capital that are okay with that to not be directly the cause of extinction in the process of their investment portfolio? Yes, you need capital that is aligned with those things. Should not steward anyone's capital that is not, otherwise you are fiduciarily bound to the extinction paradigm.
Thank you. Very helpful. I don't know how your time is today, but we're reaching the 90 minutes of our slot, and sometimes it's also getting late-ish. Do you have a hard stop in 5 minutes?
I'm happy to take another question.
Okay.
And
Let's have.
I guess one thing I want to say is the Peter Diamandis message is so much more exciting. Like, everything's getting better and AI is going to solve all the problems, and it'll create some problems, but there have always been problems, and humanity are problem solvers and we'll rise to the occasion. We'll innovate our way out of it. It's going to bring an era of such abundance and it'll redistribute all of the wealth. So blah, blah, blah. And we'll be a spacefaring and we'll live forever. And I would tell that story if it was true, because it's a more fun story. It's just not true.
What is how, as you pointed out, how are the Peter Diamandis and the Tony Seba stories related to one another? Are they the same story, or is there a difference?
I don't know the Tony Seba story.
The Rethink X story.
You'd have to walk me through it. I've looked at Rethink X, but it's been a while.
The reason why I ask is, to me, they're the same, because ultimately they're beginning at very small boundary conditions, let's say city level or something like that, and then hope they scale their way up to the globe by innovation. But it's just hope, and it isn't thought through deeply from a first principles perspective. And it's a very powerful narrative.
When we say Rethink X, it is exactly the thing I'm saying. I would say think is not adequate, and you can't, but rethink what the word resource means, right? Rethink the word mind, rethink thinking in models, and rethink the adequacy of thinking as a epistemic frame that doesn't also include other types of intelligence. So we're saying the same thing, but I think you're saying, how deep down in the stack of assumptions do we go? It is my assessment that if you take the cumulative effect of the reality of history being written by the winners, the cumulative effect of that is the naive progress narrative. Because everybody that lost wouldn't have called that win progress, and the technology and ideas that went along with it progress. So I bought this shit. I didn't know. I bought that, like, Western civilization and democracy and modernity and getting out of the dark ages and the philosophy of science and whatever were, like, generally pretty good things. And there's some problems with modernity, so we need some of the postmodern corrections. But until I really studied it, and then I'm like, wait, my country, the founding fathers that we canonize as almost saints were, to the British Empire, terrorists. We call other people terrorists. So a terrorist or a freedom fighter just depends on which side of the story you're on and whether they win or not. So they were seditious terrorists. And it's very well documented that Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the unbelievably beautiful Declaration of Independence, raped his underage slave continuously. And it is documented that those same people gave smallpox blankets to the Indians as gifts, where when we talk about how dare you question capitalism, don't you know that it has brought all the people out of poverty and done all these wonderful things? Didn't you read Pinker? Communism, don't you know that Stalin killed 50 million people? We killed 110 million Indians when we came here. We dwarfed Stalin. We dwarfed Mao. Fuck, do the history. We killed 110 million Indians of all these civilizations that had made it tens of thousands of years in relatively better sustainability. Their languages are gone, their knowledge of it. So ask how the Western civilization, democracy, progress narrative is to the Indians and to all the extinct species and to all the animals in factory farms. It's not like, I like Novocaine. I think Novocaine is cool. I would not like dentistry without Novocaine. I'm down with the parts of the progress narrative that are authentic. But also when Weston Price went to the indigenous cultures before they had introduced hybridized grain, they didn't get cavities. Go back and look at Weston Price's fucking work. We're not supposed to eat grains as a hunter-gatherer people, and the mineral density meant that they didn't get cavities. So even you wouldn't want to go back to a world before Novocaine, would you? If it was also without the grains that caused the Anthropocene, we're painting a bullshit story. So basically, I think the naive progress narrative is apologism for Moloch. And I think we all have Stockholm syndrome with Moloch. I think almost everyone who's successful is less fulfilled, like actually fulfilled, meaning waking up, base happiness for no reason, sense of meaningfulness, can die with peace. Almost everyone who's successful is less fulfilled than almost every indigenous person that were the savages we had to civilize. And net way more harmful for the world. When Krishnamurti said, it is not a good measure of mental health to be well adjusted to an insane society, go to a fucking factory farm and realize that our society is as insane as Nazi Germany was, but at way more scale. We are driving it in the name of progress. I want anyone who gives a shit at all to extract themselves from the insanity deeply enough to shake it off, that the momentum of that system and, oh, but I have to do the bidding of that system, I'll do a slightly better job. No, you don't. Just fucking stop. You have a choice. Stop. You don't have to do that. Then reorient yourself to life, not Moloch, life. Look at all the concepts that are bullshit. Oh, we're going to optimize based on measurement and natural resources and like bleh. Progress. We civilize the savages. And start to understand life. How do 70 trillion cells in my body do 1 trillion metabolic functions a second and work? That's more complexity than the governance system we need to make. Nature knows how to do it. We don't know how to do it. Spend time in nature and start to understand, but you can't understand it in words, but you can understand it. I'm not saying a gibberish thing. I'm saying a thing that can get reduced into technology, but a different way. And then say, there was this beautiful conversation I watched. I believe it was with Edward Teller talking about the physicists who did modern physics, and the journalist asked him who was the smartest, and he's like, duh, Johnny von Neumann was the smartest in terms of clock speed. We all knew that. No one had a question about it. No one was even in competition about it. And he went on and on. And the interviewer then said, does that mean that von Neumann had the deepest insights? And he teared up and he said, no, that would be sure Einstein. And there's why did someone who had less clock speed have deeper insights? And he's like, this was the question that boggled von Neumann. And we came to recognize it had something to do with what happened when he played the violin, and something to do with what happened when he puffed his pipe and looked at the clouds and went blank. And this was reducible to real intelligence that solved real problems through a different process that is not gibberish. It's just a different process. It was not purely semantically mediated, which is what the Tao Te Ching starts with, which is what all of the wisdom traditions say the symbol that mediates ground. There's reality out there. We make up symbols to refer to it. The symbol is not the thing being referred to. The symbol does not have all the information of the thing being referred to. You have to have a direct relationship to the ground, not mediated by symbol, meaning not mediated through thought. If you don't know how to think not through word thought, you will never think deeply. And that will be like thinking, feeling, sensing. And then you can translate it to words and you'll always know they're inadequate. And you'll write something that is somewhere between math, prose, and poetry, right? Because they do different things. Some of it I can do denotatively, some I have to do connotatively because the limits of denotation. So how do 70 trillion cells work in timed harmony at a trillion metabolic functions a second? How does an embryo grow itself where it's growing the placenta and umbilical cord that it's going to let drop off later, while simultaneously growing the lungs and GI tract that are doing nothing now, but will replace it later, while growing the endocrine system and the skeletal system and all that stuff, without even having those systems to mediate how it does it? What the fuck, right? Try to understand how nature does it better, and then say, this is what I am a steward of. This is what I'm avowed to. And there are not multiple gods that I'm avowed to. And the one that I am doesn't have a name. If you name it, you fucked it all up already. You start a holy war over it. But that intelligence that governs everything, that is the basis of, we do not have a good answer to cosmogenesis or abiogenesis, the emergence of life, the emergence of cosmos. All of the standard models have massive problems. The emergence of consciousness from brain, which is a wrong presupposition. But reality does it all. My dad just passed a few weeks ago, and I was reading all the old letters that we've written each other. And he wrote me this fucking beautiful letter when I was like 20 something. And he said, and he was a deep thinker from which I was initiated into thinking on these things. And he said, the world will see challenges in the age of your growing up that it has never seen, for which there are no precedents, for which no previous models will be adequate, and nation states will try to meet them and they will fail, and the great market and industrial forces will try to meet them and fail. The only thing I can tell you is pay attention to what nature wants and try to redirect the resources there. And that's what I would say to people who are thinking of resource directing, is try to think about what nature wants and try to feel into it. And don't think that you can, in the same way that like it's a very right thing for someone in a poor Black neighborhood to say, if you don't live here, if you don't spend time here and you make the laws that govern here, fuck off. Like, you can't make the right laws if you don't fucking live here, because you don't get it. You're wrong. Live here and make the laws. If you don't spend enough time in nature, and both nature and the tar sands and destroyed coral and factory farms that we have turned nature into, if you don't touch that, you cannot know what nature wants or needs. If you do, then can you let the mud settle until clarity emerges and then act from there? That's what I would say.
That's beautiful. Thank you. One last thing before we can let you go. We ask everybody to try and condense what you want us to take away from this session in a single word. What word would that be for you?
Remember the deepest insights you've ever had about what matters.
We will. I promise I will try to remember. I promise I will help us remember here in this group. Thank you.
You had mentioned that you would dialogue with people about this afterwards. I'm really curious to hear what metabolizes, and if there are deep projects that want to happen, if people feel yes, I want to steward that, I'm committed to it. If I can help, you know how to find me.
We will. Thank you for that offer. I will definitely be in touch about what comes up here afterwards.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Daniel. It's
To meet
been
everybody.
Thank you.
amazing.
It's been great.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.